Hey there, and welcome to the garden. Today I'm just kind of sitting out here and enjoying a little bit of a warm February day. We've been having some, I don't know if it's really abnormal, but it's really been nice. We've been having like 50 degrees, 60 degree Fahrenheit days. It's been beautiful. I'm trying to get out in the garden and just kind of sit and enjoy it, listen to the birds, look for signs of spring, see if there's anything coming up, any little changes, making plans, all that good stuff. And as I was thinking through some of my planning, I started to think about the lessons that I had learned in the last garden season, and I wrote down some of the biggest ones and thought I would kind of just share them with you, just to sort of specific to different plants, what's growing well in shade, what's growing well really needs to be in the sun, just all those kind of things. And so my first garden lesson that I learned is that the Arch Trellis is 100% where I want to grow tomatoes forever. Any garden I ever have, sometimes I dream about like a future garden that's got, you know, lots and lots and lots of raised beds. I would have tons of trellises, and I would always love to grow tomatoes on arch trellises. Like growing a tomato plant over the arch trellis, the tomatoes coming down is just, I loved it. I loved everything about it. I grew Juliet tomatoes. They were really nice, saladette kind of size tomato. My daughter loves to eat tomatoes as snacks. She just eats them raw as snacks, and so they were perfect for just kind of chopping up for that. And there was just such an abundance of them. It became like one of her favorite things too, to come down to the garden and let's pick tomatoes. She's still, even now, when I tell her like, do you want to come down to the garden, she's like, oh, can we pick tomatoes? Like, it just became such a fun part of our garden routine, and I thought it was so pretty and whimsical. I'm growing the clematis on the arch trellis as well, so I'm going to hopefully have a combination of clematis and tomatoes. Hopefully it'll be really, really pretty. I want just those bunches of cherry tomatoes. So I think I'm gonna do Juliet and then also Barry's Crazy Cherry. And the cool thing about these indeterminate tomatoes is that they get huge. This is 15 feet. If you go from one raised bed all the way up and over and down to the other side on the trellis, that's 15 feet. And my tomato plant probably got at least 10 feet by the end of the season, and of course was branching off like crazy. If I grow a couple tomato plants on the trellis, I'm definitely gonna have to trim them more. This, I kind of just let the Juliet tomato go wild. I didn't really stay on top of trimming it, but even so, it's just a beautiful way to grow tomatoes. And I see a lot of things on arch trellis, but not as often tomatoes, and I think they are probably the perfect thing to grow on arch trellis. So I will be doing that. Juliet tomatoes, Barry's Crazy Cherry, as I said, and I may do like one other variety. We'll just kind of see how that goes. But that was like a good garden lesson. Beautiful. I also learned one plant that I really like, and that is Lantanas. So every year I kind of make notes of the plants that do really well and don't get bothered by pests, that don't have a lot of issues. One of those plants is salvia. In years past, I've always really like just made a note like, hey, that one's not bugged by bugs. And this year I really realized that lantanas are another one that do really well. And they're fun because they grow in containers, but they're one of those plants that kind of shoot out in different directions. So they definitely add to a container because they kind of can poke in and around other plants and fill a container out and just kind of add a really abundant look to the garden. So I'm going to be growing a lot more lantanas. With that in mind, the season really reaffirmed to me that dahlias struggle in my garden. They just get attacked by spider mites, and halfway through the season I actually ended up ripping out most of my dahlia plants. I left one, I still have one, but when I went to start looking for seeds and plans for this year, I thought about getting more dahlia tubers, and I just decided no, for right now I'm not going to, because I you know, as much as I like to think that I'm going to stay on top of treating a plant for pests like weekly, as much as I think that I have enough discipline to do that, I just don't. I end up forgetting, bugs end up moving in, like it just becomes a problem, and the plants look so terrible. And in my garden, it's so small, I have to save room for the things like the lantanas, the salvias that do really, really well, that aren't bugged by the pests. I have to kind of just like keep those going because I want my whole garden to look fresh. And in this size garden, if you have one thing that starts looking bad, it kind of it shows up more, you know. It's not this huge massive space where a spider mite eaten plant can kind of just get lost. No, you really see it, you really notice it. So as hard as it is to say that as of right now I'm kind of skipping dahlias, that is definitely one of the lessons I had to learn. I'm just taking dahlias kind of off the list for now until like I have a schedule that is able to be a little bit more disciplined, because right now with the girls that's a little bit hard. One big lesson I learned was my layout. I like to think of these raised beds almost like little containers, or big containers I should say. So I realized that I need to really think about the layout of the plants in the raised beds. I've been doing different exploring with like lines, growing things down this ways and that. And this year I'm gonna try to more like thriller in the middle, spillers around the sides, fillers underneath the big tall ones in the middle, like kind of treat it a little bit more like a traditional container, so that these raised beds are really fully ornamental and really show off all the plants that are in them. I always feel like the raised beds are ornamental. I always feel like there's an element of I'm growing, you know, these plants for food, but also for the beauty of the garden, and I love the look of the whole big beautiful garden. But I need to kind of hone in a little bit more on showcasing, my daughter's down here in her wrapper, on showcasing the beauty of each of these plants, because sometimes I end up with, like I had a pepper in a front corner of one of my garden beds. It got huge, and so basically you couldn't see the rest of the garden bed. So that's not really showcasing the other plants as well as it could, and I'm maximizing the beauty of my garden space as well as all the other pieces involved in growing, just having food production and that sort of thing. So I really need to work on my height and my layout, making sure that the taller things are at the back and that I'm kind of doing the spillers over the side, the fillers around the edges. I really want to focus in that I'm doing the thrillers in the center, the spillers on the sides, you know, tall things to the back as needed depending on the garden bed, and really creating that beauty in the space as well. So I'm gonna be looking to do a bit more of that. And with that in mind, I'm working on my layout as well, because I really started to realize this year that this is my south facing, right on this wall, this is south facing, but I'm often coming from the house, which is north. So although I should be growing the shorter things toward the fence, I want the taller things toward the fence and the shorter things in front, because that's just how I'm looking at my garden. So it makes it a little bit tricky, and I think my solution is going to be, you know, utilizing some more shade loving things here on the more northern side, so that I'm seeing those shade loving things at the front of the bed, the sun loving things are at the back of the bed, and they're getting, you know, more of that full sun experience, and they're just a bit happier. And these are the kind of tweaks, like it's taken me a few seasons to get to this point where I'm really thinking about it in this way, I guess, and really realizing what the light requirements mean. Part of that is just my journey as a gardener and learning more and more how to garden well, but then also just getting used to what it really means to be in this particular garden with the sun the way it is and the shade the way it is. So I'm going to be really thinking about where the south facing areas are, what I'm planting there, and how I'm kind of structuring each of these raised beds and the containers as an overall look, and structuring them so that the most sun-loving things are actually toward the fence, and then shadier things are moving up toward the house. And I think that's going to work out well once I get that all really dialed in, and I'm going to be really working on that this year. And that's kind of my biggest thing too, is treating this whole garden as one cohesive vision. I've often popped in random little containers, like I'd find a random plant and I just put it in a container, which, you know, of course I'm always going to be finding things, but I really want to treat the garden as this full vision this year. Last year I felt like I had a few containers that were just kind of random. They didn't really match anything, and they didn't, again, in a small space, they didn't get lost. They were really obvious and kind of bugged me throughout the season, and I never was super happy with them. So I'm going to be totally thinking of a full cohesive vision. I want this like vintage, cottagey, whimsical garden this year. That's the look I'm going for. And I think I've got some good ideas to make that happen. And I just am going to treat this whole space as one vision. I started that last year by carrying some of my perennials around to the other side. So I used to just have perennials over in this corner. And then last year I brought them all the way around. I got a couple more of the same phlox, a couple more black-eyed Susans, so I could just pull the whole garden together. And it wasn't like one side looked one way and one side looked the other way. Let's see. I also learned a few things about planting requirements. So I learned that planting green beans in July is the perfect time for me to plant them. I shared a lot about this because I was so excited when I figured this out. But I had often struggled with green beans and having, again, issues with spider mites and just not getting good production. And I actually found that planting them in that summer, thick of the summer heat, right in July, they sprouted so quickly. I mean, basically overnight. They grew really quickly. I was harvesting them in September. It was wonderful. So I will be planting lots of green beans and all those kinds of things in July. So stay tuned for that. I got a bunch of varieties. It's gonna be really fun. And then I also really learned that eggplants do amazing in containers. They don't skip a beat. I planted more eggplants in containers and I didn't notice any difference from the eggplants that I planted in raised beds. It was like same production, amazing production, great harvest. They were happy. They're really pretty plants. So I'm gonna be growing a lot of eggplants in containers. And similar to growing eggplants in containers, I'm gonna be doing a lot of peppers in containers too, because they really thrived in containers as well. I've always grown tomatoes in containers and really enjoyed that process. I think they're a great food crop to grow in containers. But I actually found that I noticed a little difference where the tomatoes actually did better in the raised beds, but the peppers and the eggplants, I felt like they just did just as well in containers and we're super happy. So I'm gonna do a ton of peppers in containers. And I just find that I love peppers. Like they're absolutely one of my favorite things to grow. They're just fun to eat. I like to snack on them and just like even more than a tomato. My daughter will eat all of the tomatoes out of the garden. So I never have any problem with that. I'm not really a raw tomato person. Like I'll throw them in a sauce. I love to have them with pasta or something. But if I just want to like go out and have a snack in the garden, I will eat peppers, like sweet peppers. So I'm gonna do a bunch of little snack peppers and things like that. And I'm gonna grow them in containers because the other thing I learned about peppers this year was that you can grow them in a little bit of part shade. At least that was my experience. I had a couple like snack bell peppers that I just threw in a couple containers. By happenstance, they sort of ended up being in a bit of a part shade area in my garden. It just kind of happened that way. And they did fabulous. They were producing peppers all over the place. They were really happy. I mean, maybe, you know, if they'd been in full sun, they probably would have done better. They probably would have produced even more, but they did just fine. Like I was happy with the production. I had no issue with how many I got. And yeah, I was really happy with it. So I'm gonna do some more peppers like in this area right by the Arch Trellis, and that's a part shade area for me. So I'm gonna do some peppers in there, and I think it's gonna be good. I'm excited. I'm so excited to fill up all of these containers. It's gonna be really fun. And my last big lesson, which also comes down to containers. Sorry if I'm bobbing. I'm trying to keep her happy. My last big lesson was to overplant containers and to not overplant containers. This is a two-part thing. There are times to overplant containers. And what I mean by overplant is just really pack a container full of plants. If you are doing a container of annual flowers, in my experience from my own growing and from what I see other growers and other people doing, you want to pack that container full. I don't know, every time I leave space, I don't know if it's because I don't have the fullest sun here. I do try to fertilize really regularly. That's always super important. But I left some space in a couple containers because I was like, oh, I'm planting these annuals early, some like petunias and coleus and that kind of things. The containers never reached the point that I wanted. The containers that I fill up, like really put a ton of plants in, they always end up looking beautiful. Even if there's one plant that kind of lags and fails, it like doesn't matter because the other plants pick up for it and fill it up. So with full scale summer annuals that you're just fertilizing like crazy, pack out those containers if you can. at least that's what I'm going to be doing. Certainly in my fall garden with my fall containers, with my like violas and things like that, I'm going to be putting tons of them in there just to really, really fill up the space. But on the other hand, the other thing I learned was that when I'm trying to grow like vegetables in containers, or I'm trying to grow plants from seed in containers, you do not want to overplant. You do not want to overpack it. I did a couple grow bags where I had like a squash and a couple other things, and I put too many seeds in there. Nothing was able to really grow to its full potential. They needed more space, they needed, I don't know, just more room, and it didn't work. So for my big grow bags where I'm going, like I'm gonna grow a squash in a grow bag, I'm probably just gonna keep just the squash in the grow bag and really not grow anything else in there. And I'm gonna do a few zinnias in a grow bag, but I'm just gonna put a couple. I'm not gonna overplant it when I'm starting from seed, because there's a difference when you start with a started plant versus when you start with a seed. And I'm starting to notice that you can put things more close together if you're starting with started plants. You can pack them in. But if you're starting from seeds, and I haven't fully fleshed out like the science behind this or really all the anecdotal evidence, but I am going to keep kind of looking into this, because I feel like there is this big difference. If you start things from seed, which I do like to start a lot in vegetables and in containers from seed, you have to give them more room versus if you're doing starts. So that's going to be something I'm going to be kind of working on and learning more about too. But it was a real noticeable thing, a real noticeable lesson that I learned in the garden this year, and then I'm taking into my next year garden. So those are my big garden lessons from 2022 and kind of how I'm implementing them in this year's garden. I'm just excited to get growing. So it's fun to kind of really think through what I learned last year and what I'm going to be doing differently. Anyways, thank you so much for hanging out and watching, and I'll talk to you in the next video.